A growing refugee crisis and a violent revolution in Egypt highlight the failures of the immigration system. I discuss this and more in today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is about the Egyptian Revolution and immigration. I am referring to Live from Cairo by Ian Bassingthwaighte, and that was published in 2017. For those who don't know, Ian Bassingthwaighte is an American author, white American author, who is still writing, it seems. Don't know too much about them. They've only written one book, and it is this. In addition to that, they also served in a immigration refugee office in Cairo. They had an internship there that they were doing presumably to write this book. Which is interesting, based on some of the stuff that Bassingthwaighte writes here. So they do have some experience with what they're writing about here. And they've written a couple of articles, short stories, and they have a website where they post some pictures the photos that they've taken. But yeah, Ian hasn't really written anything else. I'd be interested in seeing more of what he can write, because this was a pretty high quality book and I'm going to recommend it to you out there. But without further ado, let's talk about Live from Cairo, which I got from my local library. Don't forget to patronize your local libraries. They might have interesting random books that you can find. But yeah, as I said, we'll discuss this. I'll do a summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we'll move on from there. So Live from Cairo takes place during the 2010-2011 Egyptian Revolution, where the people were trying to overthrow Mubarak and then reassert power once the Supreme Council took over and seemed to enact the same policies that Mubarak had. The story focuses on three main characters. Hana, who is an Iraqi resettlement officer. She has come to Egypt. She seems to be trying to escape something. We learned that her father died because of Islamist extremists in Iraq, so her family moved to America. And then her sister returned as a journalist and wanted to get closer to her father. But unfortunately, she also died. And her mother seems to be ailing from something. She's sick. So Hannah doesn't want to deal with that, and she's gone to this new job. It also focuses on Dalia, who Hannah is trying to help. Dalia has showed up at the resettlement office because her husband, Omran, is in America. He and her were living in Iraq, and he was helping the military build things because he was an engineer, and once the military left, the extremist attacked his family, threatened to rape Dalia, and took Omran's eyes and left him heavily wounded. So he was able to get a green card because of his work with the military and go to America. But he couldn't bring Dalia because Dalia was technically not married to him. They got married in a religious ceremony which didn't have any paperwork. And so Dalia was stuck in Iraq. She eventually made her way to Egypt, where she was raped by a cleric prior to coming in there, which she hasn't told Omran about because she doesn't want to saddle him with that knowledge. And she's ended up in Egypt, where she's trying to plead her case before Hana and the other resettlement officers. And then it also focuses on Charlie, who is an advocate for Dalia. He's her lawyer. He works for a nonprofit that works with trying to help refugees get out of the country and end up elsewhere. He's very optimistic, very idealist, but as the story progresses, that's kind of beaten out of him in a number of ways. Unfortunately, at the beginning of the story, Dalia's case is rejected because her story doesn't align with her testimony that she had written previously. Basically, it comes down to the fact that she doesn't want to talk out loud about the rape that happened to her and the threat of rape in the future. And so Like, Hana has no choice but to reject her case right there. Charlie continues to advocate for Dalia, but it seems like she's kind of defeated at this point. There's not really a lot that they can seem to do. Charlie and Dalia both call Omran in America, and Omran considers moving to Egypt, even though he's an immigrant. There's not a lot that he can do there, and the tide may turn to become increasingly unsympathetic for immigrants. And Dalia tries to convince Omran to stay, but he's working on getting his passport. Later, Hana and Charlie end up meeting up and go to get a beer. Hana tells Charlie about her sister and how she died, and the guilt that she feels and all of that. And Hana and Charlie even go to talk to Dalia again, although Dalia doesn't really want to talk to Hana because Dalia knows what Hana wants to hear. And feels that she's to blame for not getting the yellow card that would help her get out of Egypt. But Charlie makes a scheme to help Dalia and get her that yellow card by forging documents. And while he's working on that, a bunch of people hear that his office has plane tickets that they're willing to give away to refugees in need. So they gather, although Charlie and the others have to talk and tell them that that's not going to happen, kind of showing the desperation of the moment. And ultimately, after all of this, Hana decides to forge the paperwork for Dalia, mostly out of a connection to them both being Iraqi. And they work with a man named Naguib, who is closely connected to Eos, one of Charlie's coworkers. He's a doctor, and he forges medical records that'll help Dalia indicate that she's in need of a surgery that can only be done in America or something like that. Naguib just requires 50,000 Egyptian dollars, Egyptian money, to help his son, who is also sick, which Charlie agrees to, even though he doesn't really have the money. They meet Naguib, and Charlie tries to give him at least $20,000, but Naguib doesn't accept that because he's desperate and needs to help his son. And then a soldier shows up and sees them kind of doing shady things on the street, and he proceeds to attack everyone. He even reaches a point where he almost kills Hana, but Eos, one of Charlie's coworkers, intervenes and kills the soldier. And Hana helps dump his body in the Nile, which fills everyone with an intense sadness and sort of guilt about having done such a dangerous act. Later, everyone gathers at Charlie's house, again, still feeling guilty, but Charlie notes that he's still willing to help Dalia, but the others say they can't really do that because Naguib had the forged documents that he's not willing to give over now that he doesn't have that money. And then a short while later, Charlie and his coworkers gather at Tahrir Square, where a bunch of the protests are taking place. But the military turns water guns on everybody, and they spray Eos, one of Charlie's coworkers, again. And it seems that he's severely injured in that process, or he might have even died because of the blast of the water cannon. And Charlie is just completely taken aback that they would do something to such a good man and to someone who was native to the area. Like, imagine what they would do to someone who was not native. Meanwhile, Omran has decided to come to Egypt, meets up with Dalia, who tells him, like, you shouldn't have come. But he's like, I'm sorry, I had to. And they share love. There's an implication that they have sex, which is a beautiful moment, able to reconnect in that way. And in the epilogue, we see that Charlie's kind of defeated. He's lost his idealism, and Dalia is scared by how much it seems he isn't invested in his work at that moment. And it's also implied that Eos either left or he died. Something happened to him. And Hana even writes a letter to Dalia telling her story. Dalia senses that Hana wants to hear more about the rape that may have happened to her. But Dalia doesn't want to share that. And Hana even warns her about the smugglers. But again, as the story comes to a close, we see that Dalia has paid the smugglers and they're waiting for the boat at that point. They think they might be cheated out, but there's an implication that the boat is coming around the corner to take them to Italy. In terms of analysis, there is quite a bit worth talking about with Live from Cairo. A lot of discussion of the immigration system and its failings, all told within the sort of a context of a revolution that is making things worse, not only for the people who live there, but also potentially the immigrants. Everyone is being exploited in some way, and the only hope is that the UN is able to provide them with a yellow card that helps them leave to Europe or America in some capacity. But even despite all of that, one of the themes that Bassingthwaighte is talking about here is the bureaucracy versus the real lives that are at stake. The resettlement workers and lawyers know that things are bleak. There is a sense of optimism among some of them, like maybe we can help some people. We can help people like leave, especially those who truly need it, like Dalia. Charlie believes that Dalia's case is very legitimate, and if she were to talk to the UN people, they would be willing to give her a yellow card, which would help her get to America and have a better life in America, where she's not constantly surrounded by the threat of revolution. But as the story goes on, like things become more clear that the system isn't really willing to help people like Dalia, or even the common people of Egypt in the midst of this revolution. The system seems designed to funnel. I think Hana even acknowledges that it's not meant to help everyone. It's meant to funnel the number of people who get into America. Rather than everyone, it's designed to say, oh, only these people can come, because those other countries like America, like United Kingdom, like Italy, like many other countries, have an anti-refugee sentiment, and they see one of their problems as caused by the immigrants. So they're funneling all of that, even though the immigrants probably aren't really the problem. But this all creates a false hope for the immigrants, because they see the UN and they see these nonprofits as an opportunity to leave an oppressive regime, leave their troubles behind. And when they go through the system, they're like, oh yeah, it's actually not going to help me at all. A good example of this is a man named Ali who, at the beginning of the story, he shows up with a knife to his throat in Charlie's sort of building. And he's like, give me a yellow card right now, or I'll kill myself. I know that the system is rigged and I need help right now. Like, he's so disillusioned before he even gets into the system that he's ready to kill himself, because him and his family are pretty desperate, and things don't get much better as the story progresses. And I think Charlie and Hana's experience on the street, where they come into conflict with a soldier, something that the immigrants probably experience on a regular basis, like that illustrates the bleak reality for them. And it kind of breaks both of them. Hana decides to just quit her job and move back to America to take care of her ailing mother, who might be in the process of dying. And Charlie, he's still in Egypt, but I don't think he believes in the cause anymore. The death of Eos, as well as the failure to actually help Dalia, I think it's sort of beaten him and broken him in a way where he's probably not going to invest the same amount of energy as he did before, knowing that the bureaucracy is not really there to help, and the city of Cairo, the country of Egypt, isn't making things much better in the midst of all this political turmoil that is going on. The ending even suggests that there's only risk involved, that for immigrants, you can try to get a yellow card, which might not work. You can try to forge something, which again still might not work. And the worst case scenario is maybe you can get smuggled aboard on a boat, but that won't always work because it might sink. You might get caught by the Coast Guard, or you might land, but they might not let you really live. We don't really know what's going to happen to Dalia and Omran at the end of the story. There is some hope, but it's, given what we've seen, there's not really that hope. It's really a desperate situation with kind of a bleak outcome, no matter how you look at it, unfortunately. Another big theme that Ian is working with here is that of the city of exiles. Each character seems to have exiled themselves to the secluded city of Cairo, to the city that's been cut off from the world and is only focused on itself, the political turmoil of the Egyptian revolution. You see this with Charlie and his brother Tem. Charlie kind of has a troubled relationship with his brother Tim because Tim married the woman that Charlie loved, but also Charlie got into a drunken accident with Tim in the car, and it seems to have hurt Tim in an irreparable way. And so Charlie feels guilty, and he's sort of like left for Egypt while his brothers join the military, not really crossing paths too often. And when they do, Charlie just doesn't want to be around Tim for that reason. He loves his brother, but also his presence reminds him of everything he's trying to run away from. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Such incidents gave Charlie a rich history in this beloved place. He belonged there more than he belonged anywhere else in the world. Why did Tim have to bring that other world into El Horea? I wish you hadn't come, said Charlie suddenly. He gestured to the room, but also beyond it. The walls touched the sidewalk, which touched the street. From there, you could reach all of Egypt. To be honest, I wish you laid over in a different city. I have a life here that doesn't involve anything or anyone from Montana. And that's a really sad quote, sort of pointing out that he's wanted to escape his life in Montana, and anytime that he's around Tim, it just reminds him more of the life that didn't quite seem to work out for him. And Hana is also seemingly doing the same thing. She's trying to escape the death of her father, the death of her sister, and also the impending death of her mother from whatever seems to ail her. And Hannah's throwing herself into her work in this resettlement office, but her inability to help even Dalia, I think, is kind of forcing her to realize how none of this is really working out for her. And maybe the best thing to do is just go and spend time with family. And then Dalia is also kind of exiling herself here. I think she wants to leave to America and be with Omran, but at the same time, I think she feels guilty. She kind of blames herself for getting raped after leaving Iraq and doesn't want to force that upon Omran, which is very complicated and a sad type of feeling. It's not her fault that she got raped, but she might see it as her own fault for leaving Iraq in the first place. And so she's kind of remained here. And then Eos is another interesting character in this story because he is a native Egyptian. Like, he's lived in Cairo, and this is his home, but he still seems like an exile because the military, the government, has sort of has begun treating even natives poorly as they're protesting for rights, protesting corruption, protesting a government that doesn't treat them fairly, a government that is stealing and sort of becoming like or thieving from the Egyptian people in many ways. And the story kind of ends with his implied death, or at least him leaving Egypt. So even he's an exile from his own city, not really feeling like he belongs there, constantly telling Charlie, oh, Egypt can be so much more, but Charlie, I think his idealism causes him to focus on other issues, and so Eos maybe doesn't feel like he has Charlie on his side. What's really interesting is that Ian worked in a refugee office. So did he see this in the people who worked there, that they were slowly coming to realize that their lives were meaningless, or that they didn't want to actually be at home anymore? Or is that the type of person that this job attracts? But also, like, did Ian feel this himself when he was in Egypt, kind of a disillusionment with the system? It's really telling, and it'd be really unfortunate if that were the case. But I think sort of understanding that helps you see the failures in the system. There are other interesting elements of the story. A failing revolution, I like how Ian describes it, because even after Mubarak was ousted from power, the Supreme Court kind of took over and just enacted the same policies that Mubarak did. And then another person came to power, and they were deposed by a general who came to power, and he's kind of been authoritarian like Mubarak since that point. And so Bassingthwaighte's kind of highlighting how the failed revolution is disillusioning the citizens, but also causing a bunch of anxiety in the immigrants who wonder, like, will the people who come to power be favorable to immigrants, or will they cite us as the problem and keep booting us to another country and we'll never have a home again? I like that question that Ian kind of poses there. I also like how he describes Charlie's love, sort of how Charlie has fallen for Dalia, but he recognizes that his love can never be, and so he realizes the best thing to do is to get Dalia out of Egypt, back to America to be with Omran, and so he can stop thinking about her, stop considering her. It's a very sweet kind of feeling, but also deeply sad knowing that he's ultimately not able to help her. And then another interesting element of the story is the out-of-sequence storytelling. A lot of points where Ian Bassingthwaighte is kind of jumping back and forth in time here, which I think is a pretty fascinating way to weave the narrative. Hana will describe something awful that happened to her, and then several chapters later, Ian will go into that, and it'll kind of be informing conversation that Hana is having with another person. And it's a pretty interesting way to tell the story. It certainly makes it flow pretty smoothly, and I don't think it's I don't think like the way like ever really jars like the overall telling of the story. Of course, there are a couple problems with this book. I think this suffers from slow pacing and plot issues. It takes forever to get to the point, but also there's not really a point. The plot is barely there. Stuff just happens until the end, and there's no real central story element to keep the plot going. It's just Dalia needs needs a yellow card in order to get to America. They kind of work towards that, but there's nothing really guiding the story. It's more about the atmosphere of Cairo, which isn't bad, but I would have appreciated something more solid in the plot. And then it does feel like the characters are inconsequential as well. It's funny because if Hana, Charlie, and Eos, if they had done nothing in this story, like if they had just accepted that Dalia wasn't getting a card, Dalia would have ended up with Omran regardless, because Omran would have come and visited Dalia. Like regardless of whether they intervene in the story, the same outcome happens. So it just feels like Charlie and Hana feel inconsequential. Like they're like if they had done nothing, the story would have turned out the same, which is never really how you want your story to feel. But maybe that also is Ian's point, because he's trying to highlight how nothing really gets done in the immigration system, and you're probably better off not fighting your way through it to get that false hope and whatnot. I just feel the need to point out that the characters feel inconsequential, even if that immigration element was the point of it all. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Live from Cairo by Ian Bassingthwaighte. Pretty solid book. What I really like about it is I haven't really read a good book in a while. Or just like a decent book. Like there's been some really great ones, and there's been some real stinkers as of late. But this one is it's good. It's a decent book. It might not end up on my year-end list. It might. There's a lot of stuff worth thinking about. But in the end, it's like a really solid pick for my library, which I feel like I haven't really been getting those lately. It's just been mainly bottom of the barrel type stuff, unfortunately. But this is pretty solid, and I do recommend it to you out there if you're interested in a story about immigration, or sort of fictionalized narrative from the Egyptian Revolution of 2010 and 2011. I think it's worth reading. If you have any thoughts on it, or you want to comment on my review here, do so below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, or subscribe so that more people can find out about the author or the book if they don't already know. And then also join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about this sort of thing. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and revolutionary travels. Farewell.